What if I told you that some of Hollywood's brightest stars are hiding dark, twisted secrets buried deep within their family history? Secrets so scandalous, so shocking, they could rewrite everything we thought we knew about them. In this video, we're exposing the 10 most jaw-dropping family secrets that the world's most beloved celebrities desperately tried to keep hidden. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and drop a comment below with the one secret you never saw coming. Let's start with one of the most iconic names in Hollywood history, Marilyn Monroe. To the public, she was the ultimate sex symbol, the tragic beauty who captivated millions with her allure, her breathy voice, and her troubled yet glamorous life. But behind the blonde curls and dazzling smile was a painful legacy, rooted in mental illness and abandonment. Born as Norma Jean Mortensen, Marilyn never truly knew her father. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, struggled with severe mental illness, spending most of Marilyn's life in psychiatric institutions. But the real shock lies in Marilyn's early years, bouncing between foster homes, state care, and even an orphanage, a far cry from the silver screen fairy tales she would later star in. She once lived with a deeply religious foster family that forbade her from watching movies or developing any sense of identity beyond what they dictated. As a child, Marilyn endured emotional neglect and, according to later accounts, possible abuse. And then there's the dark truth about her mother's side. Rumors of schizophrenia, institutionalization, and family secrets that were locked away for decades. Even after Marilyn became a household name, she carried the fear that she, too, might suffer the same fate as her mother. She obsessed over her mental health, often turning to barbiturates and alcohol to self-medicate. Her relationships, her marriages, her career choices, all were haunted by the trauma she inherited. And yet, the public never truly saw that side. The studios created a pristine narrative around Marilyn. They marketed her beauty, her voice, her vulnerability, but not her truth. They hid the instability, the hospital visits, the desperate phone calls for help. And most of all, they buried the generational pain that Marilyn tried so hard to silence through fame. Her tragic death in 1962, ruled a probable suicide, was the final act in a life defined by secrets and shadows. But to this day, many believe the true story of Marilyn Monroe, the woman, not the icon, has never been fully told. And it all began with a family secret no one in Hollywood wanted to acknowledge. Now let's talk about a man whose name is forever etched in the history of film, Charlie Chaplin. The king of silent comedy, the master of physical gags, the creator of the unforgettable Little Tramp. To the world, Chaplin was a genius, a performer who could make audiences laugh and cry without uttering a single word. But beneath the bowler hat and iconic mustache was a legacy filled with scandal, betrayal, and a family secret that shattered his carefully constructed image. Born in London in 1889, Chaplin came from a family plagued by poverty, mental illness, and abandonment. His father was an alcoholic who died young, leaving Charlie and his brother Sidney in the care of their mother Hannah, a struggling stage performer who would eventually lose her mind and be institutionalized. But here's the twist most people never hear. Chaplin's mother wasn't just mentally ill, she also had a mysterious past, possibly involving prostitution and secret relationships that cast doubt on the identity of Charlie's father. Some biographers suggest that Chaplin may not have even known for sure who his real father was. As if that weren't enough, when Chaplin rose to fame in Hollywood, he carried those childhood scars into adulthood, and the way they played out is nothing short of disturbing. His obsession with young women became a pattern, with multiple marriages to teenage girls, some as young as 16, while he was in his 30s and 40s. But the darkest moment came when Chaplin was embroiled in a paternity scandal involving a young actress named Joan Barry. Although a blood test showed he wasn't the biological father, the courts still ruled against him, forcing him to pay child support. The trial was a media circus, and behind the scenes, the U.S. government was growing suspicious of Chaplin. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, launched an investigation into his political beliefs, accusing him of being a communist sympathizer. Eventually, in 1952, when Chaplin traveled to Europe for a film premiere, the U.S. revoked his re-entry permit, essentially exiling him from the country he had helped revolutionize with his art. But even more shocking is the legacy Chaplin left behind in his own family. He fathered 11 children with 4 different women, and according to some accounts, he was a distant, controlling father who carried his traumas into his parenting. His children, particularly the younger ones, grew up in the shadow of his fame but also in the shadow of his darkness. Some struggled with mental health, identity crises, and feelings of abandonment. And yet, none of this was ever spoken about publicly during his lifetime. The studios, the press, and even the public were so enamored with Chaplin's charm and brilliance that they chose to ignore the signs. The truth was buried beneath reels of film and layers of laughter. But behind the genius was a man battling demons passed down through generations, secrets that began long before he ever stepped onto a movie set and that still haunt his legacy today. Our next story is about one of the most iconic heartthrobs of the 20th century. A man whose smoldering good looks and magnetic screen presence made him a legend, yet whose private life was built on carefully hidden truths. Rock Hudson. To the public, he was the embodiment of the tall, rugged leading man, the kind of actor who could sweep any woman off her feet with a single smile. He starred in romantic dramas and war epics, sharing the screen with the most glamorous actresses of his time. But what the world didn't know was that Rock Hudson was living a double life, one constructed out of fear, pressure, and the desperate need to protect his career in a time when being openly gay could mean the end of everything. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, Hudson had a difficult childhood. His father abandoned the family, and his mother later remarried, giving him the surname Fitzgerald. Young Roy grew up quiet, shy, and unsure of himself. When he eventually made his way to Hollywood, he reinvented himself. New name, new image, new voice. He was groomed by studios to become the perfect all-American male fantasy, and for a time, he played the part flawlessly. But behind the scenes, Hudson was struggling with a secret that threatened to ruin him. He had relationships with men, but they were carefully hidden. His studio arranged a marriage to Secretary Phyllis Gates in what many now believe was a strategic cover. Though the marriage didn't last long, it was enough to silence rumors and maintain his masculine public image. His private life became a series of whispers, coded friendships, and carefully staged appearances. It wasn't just Hollywood that demanded the lie, it was society itself. Homosexuality in the 1950s and 60s wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered a crime, a disease, a moral failing. For someone like Rock Hudson, the stakes were incredibly high. His fame, his fortune, and his freedom were all on the line. And so, he kept the secret. But in the early 1980s, everything changed. Rock Hudson became one of the first major celebrities to be diagnosed with AIDS, a disease that at the time was shrouded in fear, misinformation, and stigma. At first, Hudson kept his diagnosis private, but as his health declined and speculation grew, he was eventually forced to go public. In doing so, he became the face of a crisis, not by choice, but by necessity. His revelation shocked the world. Fans who had once idolized him were suddenly confronted with a reality they weren't prepared for. But Hudson's bravery in the face of illness, and the dignity with which he handled his final days, helped change public perception, and brought much-needed attention to the AIDS epidemic. He died in 1985, and with his passing, the world lost not just a star, but a man who had carried a crushing secret for his entire life. The tragedy is that Rock Hudson never got to live openly or love freely in the way he deserved. His story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of Hollywood's image machine and the silent battles that so many have fought behind the scenes. Hudson's legacy now includes not only his unforgettable roles on screen, but also the impact he had on health awareness and LGBTQ history, all rooted in a family and a society that never truly allowed him to be himself. The next secret takes us deep into the heart of classic Hollywood glamour and into the troubled legacy of one of its most beloved actresses, Judy Garland. Known worldwide for her role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, Judy was the symbol of innocent charm and musical brilliance, a teenager who could light up the screen with a smile and make audiences believe in magic. But the truth behind her rise to fame is one of the darkest stories in Hollywood history. Born Frances Ethel Gum in 1922, Judy was pushed into show business at an early age by her ambitious mother, Ethel, whom many later described as controlling, emotionally cold, and even abusive. Judy's earliest performances were on the vaudeville circuit with her sisters, but it was clear that she was the star. When she was signed by MGM at just 13 years old, her life changed forever, and not for the better. MGM executives quickly realized Judy was a money-making machine, but they didn't see her as a child or a human being. They saw her as a product. To control her weight, studio handlers reportedly gave her amphetamines to suppress her appetite, and then sleeping pills to help her rest. This toxic cycle began in her teenage years and continued into adulthood, creating a lifelong addiction that would ultimately play a part in her early death. But that wasn't the only horror behind the scenes. Judy's mother allegedly approved of these methods, even encouraging studio executives to continue drugging her daughter to maintain her star image. Some close to Judy claim that Ethel was more interested in fame and money than her daughter's well-being. Judy would later refer to her mother as the real Wicked Witch of the West. And the dysfunction didn't stop there. Garland's personal life was marked by a string of marriages, affairs, and betrayals. She had 5 husbands and countless heartbreaks, often looking for the love and safety she never received as a child. Her mental health declined steadily as she battled depression, financial ruin, and career instability. She attempted suicide multiple times and was in and out of hospitals. And yet, despite the chaos, she remained a legend on stage, adored by millions, including a young gay community that saw her as a tragic hero, someone whose pain mirrored their own. Her daughter, Liza Minnelli, would later rise to stardom herself, carrying the weight of her mother's legacy while facing her own demons in the spotlight. What's truly shocking is how the system allowed, even encouraged, Judy's suffering. MGM didn't just ignore the warning signs, they facilitated them. The very people who were supposed to protect her, instead, destroyed her. Her story is one of lost childhood, maternal betrayal, and the price of fame when everything around you is an illusion. Judy Garland died in 1969 at just 47 years old from an accidental barbiturate overdose, her body and spirit worn down by years of abuse, manipulation, and emotional pain. Her voice may have brought joy to millions, but behind it was a life marked by sorrow, secrets, and a desperate search for love that began in her own broken family. Now we turn to one of the most influential and complex figures in modern Hollywood, Angelina Jolie. Known for her fierce beauty, powerhouse performances, and humanitarian efforts, she's been everything from a sex symbol to a UN ambassador. But what many don't realize is that behind the fierce confidence lies a family history filled with chaos, estrangement, and emotional scars that shaped her life in ways few outsiders truly understand. Born in 1975 to actors Jon Voight and Marceline Bertrand, Angelina's early life was marked by abandonment. Her father, Jon Voight, famously left the family when she was just a baby. While he continued to build a successful acting career, Marceline raised Angelina and her brother James alone, often struggling emotionally and financially. Jon Voight's absence left a wound that never fully healed. Jolie has spoken openly about the emotional damage of feeling rejected by her father and the complicated dynamic that followed. For years, she refused to even speak to him, dropping his last name and insisting she had no connection to him personally or professionally. But the story goes even deeper. According to some sources, Voight's betrayal wasn't just about walking away. It allegedly involved infidelities, broken promises, and a complete emotional disconnection from his children. Marceline, in contrast, became Angelina's rock. But even that relationship was burdened with grief. Marceline passed away in 2007 from cancer, and Jolie has often said that losing her mother changed her life profoundly. But the family dysfunction didn't end there. Angelina herself has had a roller coaster of a public life. Controversial relationships, rumors of affairs, bold public statements, and a reputation for embracing the taboo. Her early days were marked by rebellion, from blood-vial necklaces to heavily publicized kiss scenes with her brother on red carpets. Many of these moments were tabloid gold, but they stemmed from something deeper. A young woman wrestling with identity, trust, and emotional trauma rooted in her family past. Even her relationship with Brad Pitt, one of the most followed celebrity pairings in the world, eventually dissolved in acrimony, with custody battles and allegations of emotional and physical conflict. Some say Angelina's choices reflect a pattern, a cycle born from her fractured childhood, a quest for love and safety that was never fully granted by the man who was supposed to be her first protector. And in the middle of all this is Angelina's own journey as a mother. She adopted children from around the world, raised them in the spotlight, and tried to create a home that was loving, diverse, and strong, in direct contrast to the one she grew up in. But even in this attempt, the shadows of her upbringing linger. Few celebrities carry the weight of their family legacy as visibly and vulnerably as Angelina Jolie. Her story is not just one of fame, but of generational trauma, identity, and survival. She is a woman constantly evolving, reinventing, and battling with ghosts that the public never fully sees. And that's what makes her secret so haunting. It isn't buried in the past, it's alive in everything she does and everything she's overcome. The next name on our list is one that still carries a mythic aura in Hollywood: Marlon Brando. Revered as one of the greatest actors of all time, Brando's intense performances in films like A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and The Godfather changed the craft of acting forever. But what few people realize is that the man behind the genius was surrounded by tragedy, betrayal, and a family legacy so dark and twisted it still sends chills down the spines of those who know the full story. Born in 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, Marlon grew up in a household that was anything but stable. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a heavy drinker and known womanizer who was emotionally abusive. His mother, Dorothy, was an alcoholic actress who struggled with her mental health. From a young age, Brando was caught in a toxic environment, watching his mother fall into drunken stupors and his father humiliate her. The trauma of his upbringing haunted him for life and shaped the rebellious, often volatile personality that defined his career. But it's not just Marlon's childhood that hides disturbing truths. It's what happened with his own children that reveals the full weight of his family's curse. Brando had at least 11 children, both biological and adopted, and many of them were caught in a web of dysfunction, scandal, and heartbreak. The most infamous incident came in 1990 when Brando's son, Christian Brando, shot and killed Dag Drolet, the boyfriend of Brando's daughter Cheyenne, at the actor's own home. Christian claimed it was an accident, an attempt to protect his sister, who had accused Dag of abuse. The trial was a media frenzy, and Christian was eventually convicted of voluntary manslaughter and served nearly 5 years in prison. But that was just the beginning. Cheyenne Brando, deeply traumatized by the incident and her own struggles with depression and drug abuse, spiraled downward. She was denied visitation rights to her son, born shortly after Dag's death, and she never recovered emotionally. In 1995, at the age of 25, Cheyenne hanged herself in her mother's home in Tahiti. Marlon was devastated, but many believed he bore some of the blame. Critics said he was emotionally distant, manipulative, and incapable of creating a stable environment for his children. In interviews, Brando would often blame the pressures of fame and the corruption of Hollywood for his family's collapse. But insiders suggested that his inability to face his own demons had created a cycle of pain that passed from one generation to the next. Even Christian later said that growing up as Marlon Brando's son was more of a curse than a blessing. The Brando family became a symbol of the dark side of celebrity, the idea that no amount of talent, fame, or money can shield a family from destruction when the foundation is built on secrecy, trauma, and emotional neglect. Marlon Brando died in 2004, alone, reclusive, and burdened by the ghosts of his past. His legacy as an actor remains untouchable, but the true story of his family reveals a man whose brilliance was matched only by the depth of his private torment, a torment that left scars far beyond the screen. The seventh name on our list is a man whose charm, comedic timing, and blockbuster success made him one of the most beloved stars of the 1990s, Robin Williams. He was the brilliant high-energy force behind classics like Mrs. Doubtfire, Good Will Hunting, Dead Poets Society, and the voice of the genie in Aladdin. Audiences saw him as the guy who could make anyone laugh, a master of improvisation with a heart of gold. But behind the laughter, Robin Williams was fighting demons most people never saw, and his family history held secrets that helped shape the darkness he carried throughout his life. Born in 1951 in Chicago to a well-off family, Robin's early years weren't the picture of happiness many might assume. His father, Robert Williams, was a high-ranking executive at Ford Motor Company, and his job meant the family moved frequently. Robin was often left alone in large, empty homes, developing imaginary friends to cope with isolation. He described his childhood as lonely, filled with emotional distance and silence. His mother, Laurie, was a model and socialite who had a flair for humor but also expected perfection and public composure. Robin's comedic instincts were in part a desperate attempt to get her attention and affection, to make her laugh so he could feel seen. This early experience taught him to hide sadness behind humor, a pattern that would become a defining and ultimately tragic feature of his life. But things grew darker as Robin aged. He battled substance abuse during the height of his fame, confessing later that cocaine and alcohol had nearly destroyed him. Though he eventually sobered up for long periods, the internal war never really ended. What many didn't know until much later was that Robin suffered from undiagnosed mental illness and neurodegenerative disease. He was misdiagnosed with Parkinson's disease shortly before his death, but an autopsy later revealed he had Lewy body dementia, a rare and aggressive brain disorder that can cause hallucinations, paranoia, depression, and extreme cognitive decline. Friends and family later said the diagnosis explained the terrifying symptoms Robin had been experiencing but hiding: memory lapses, mood swings, confusion, and deep, unshakable fear. He was terrified he was losing himself, and he didn't want the people he loved to watch that happen. The pressure to keep performing, to always be funny, to maintain the illusion of control, became unbearable. On August 11, 2014, Robin Williams took his own life, shocking the world and leaving behind a wife, children, friends, and millions of fans who had no idea how much he had been suffering. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of his story is that even in death, the full truth didn't emerge immediately. It took months of silence, confusion, and speculation before his widow revealed the real diagnosis, trying to help the world understand what had happened and to remove the stigma surrounding his death. Robin Williams lived a life that brought joy to others, but was haunted by secrets, silent suffering, and the need to protect his loved ones from pain even at the cost of his own. His family's secret wasn't one of scandal or betrayal, but of illness, fear, and a brave man who tried to smile through the storm until it finally consumed him. He remains a legend not just for his talent, but for the vulnerability he carried in every performance. Vulnerability born from a family legacy of emotional distance, personal suppression, and the crushing weight of always being expected to shine. At number 8, we find a woman whose name is synonymous with elegance, beauty, and cinematic excellence: Audrey Hepburn. To the world, she was the epitome of grace, the doe-eyed star of Breakfast at Tiffany's, Roman Holiday, and My Fair Lady. Her fashion sense became iconic, her humanitarian work celebrated, and her smile seemed to hide nothing but warmth and kindness. But few know that behind Audrey Hepburn's refined exterior was a childhood marked by war, trauma, and a family history she worked hard to keep hidden from the spotlight. Born in 1929 in Belgium to an aristocratic family, Audrey spent much of her youth in the Netherlands during World War II. Her parents, Baroness Ella van Heemstra and Joseph Victor Anthony Rustin, were prominent figures, but their political affiliations raised dark questions. Audrey's father was a vocal supporter of fascism and an early member of the British Union of Fascists, a political movement led by Oswald Mosley that supported Hitler and Mussolini. He abandoned the family when Audrey was just 6 years old, leaving her emotionally shattered and financially vulnerable. While Audrey rarely spoke publicly about her father, it's known that the betrayal had a lifelong effect on her sense of identity and trust. Even more complicated was her mother's reported sympathy for fascist ideologies early in the war. Though Ella would later support the Allies and reportedly help shelter Jewish families, her initial leanings caused great discomfort for Audrey as she grew older and learned more about the horrors of the war. During the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, Audrey witnessed brutalities no child should ever see: executions, starvation, and fear that never left her. She was reportedly used as a courier for the Dutch resistance, delivering messages and hiding in cellars to avoid detection. She watched friends and neighbors be taken away and starved for weeks during the infamous Dutch famine of 1944. This period of her life left her physically weakened, emotionally scarred, and determined never to let others experience the same pain. Her later work with UNICEF was directly tied to the suffering she endured during the war, but she rarely disclosed just how much of her drive came from those early traumas and from the guilt and confusion over her family's initial political associations. In public, Audrey was private, always composed, and carried herself with an air of serenity. But privately she battled with depression and heartbreak, going through 2 divorces and multiple miscarriages. She often said that happiness was not something she ever truly understood. Even at the peak of her fame, she preferred the quiet of the countryside over the chaos of Hollywood. She devoted her later years to humanitarian work, traveling to war zones and famine-stricken regions, quietly using her fame to bring attention to suffering. Her son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer, would later speak about the sadness that followed his mother her entire life. A sadness born not just from personal tragedy, but from the burden of a family legacy that included abandonment, ideological shame, and the unimaginable trauma of surviving a war as a child. Audrey Hepburn may have been the picture of poise, but her story is one of resilience in the face of darkness. A star who rose above a broken foundation and dedicated her life to helping others heal from the very pain she never fully escaped. Next on our list is a Hollywood icon whose name still echoes through the corridors of film history, Judy Garland. She was the vibrant voice of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, a symbol of youthful innocence and dreamy optimism, but behind the Technicolor facade lay one of the most tragic and disturbing family stories the industry has ever known. Born Frances Ethel Gum in 1922, Judy Garland was thrust into the spotlight by her ambitious mother, Ethel Marion, who became infamous in Hollywood circles as one of the most controlling and exploitative stage mothers of her era. From a young age, Judy's life was consumed by performance. She was singing and dancing practically before she could walk, and her mother kept her on a grueling schedule that left little room for childhood joy or rest. But the most disturbing detail is that Ethel reportedly began feeding Judy amphetamines and barbiturates when she was just a child to keep her awake for performances and to help her sleep afterward. These drugs became a lifelong addiction and a tool of control used not only by her mother but later by studio executives who wanted to mold Judy into the perfect star. MGM, the studio behind The Wizard of Oz, was notorious for micromanaging Judy's appearance and weight, often putting her on extreme diets, monitoring her meals, and giving her more pills to suppress her appetite. The pressure to conform, to stay thin, to keep smiling, became unbearable. But it was her mother's coldness that cut the deepest. Judy once referred to her as the real Wicked Witch of the West and accused her of sacrificing her daughter's well-being for fame and money. Despite the abuse, Judy kept performing, kept pushing, and eventually became one of the most revered talents of her generation. But the trauma didn't stop with childhood. Her romantic life was a series of heartbreaks, divorces, and betrayals. She married 5 times, often seeking security and affection she never received at home. Her mental health deteriorated under the weight of addiction and emotional wounds that never healed. Financial ruin, suicide attempts, and public breakdowns became a recurring cycle. Her children, including Liza Minnelli, would grow up witnessing her struggles and carrying the emotional toll of a legacy built on pain. Judy Garland died in 1969 at the age of 47 from a barbiturate overdose, a tragic end that shocked the world but surprised very few who truly knew her story. Her funeral drew thousands of fans, but the real tragedy was how long she had suffered in silence. Her story is not just about a star who burned too bright. It's about a little girl who was robbed of her childhood, manipulated by those closest to her, and turned into a product by an industry that saw her as property rather than a person. The most shocking secret of all is how complicit those around her were in building the illusion of joy while she silently crumbled inside. Judy Garland remains one of the most beloved stars in cinematic history, but the truth behind her smile is one of the darkest legacies Hollywood has ever buried. Rounding out our list is the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson. To fans around the globe, he was more than a musician. He was a phenomenon, a cultural force, a symbol of creativity, rhythm, and uncontainable energy. But behind the glittering stage lights and moonwalks lay one of the most complicated and haunting family stories in the history of entertainment. Born in 1958 in Gary, Indiana, Michael was the 8th of 10 children in the Jackson family. From an early age, his life was dictated by ambition, not his own, but that of his father, Joe Jackson. Joe was a strict, domineering figure who ruled the family like a military commander, pushing his children into a relentless cycle of rehearsals, performances, and perfection. Michael, though immensely talented, was also the most vulnerable. Joe's punishments were severe and often cruel. Michael would later describe his childhood as lonely and terrifying, marked by beatings, verbal abuse, and the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations. The trauma from his father's treatment carved deep emotional scars, shaping the insecurity and need for control that followed Michael throughout his life. But what's even more shocking is how the family dynamic continued to evolve as Michael's fame eclipsed everyone else's. As he became the global superstar, tensions grew. Jealousy, manipulation, and lawsuits began to chip away at whatever unity remained. Michael tried to distance himself from his past, creating his own isolated worlds, like Neverland Ranch, places where he could feel safe, where he could reclaim the childhood he never had. But those worlds came with their own controversies and fueled speculation, rumors, and eventually legal battles that would follow him to the grave. The Jackson family's secrets didn't stop with Joe's abuse. There were rumors of hidden half-siblings, financial exploitation, and public infighting that exploded after Michael's death in 2009. The will, the estate, the custody of his children, it all became a circus that revealed just how fractured the family had become. His siblings gave conflicting interviews. His mother filed lawsuits. His father appeared at events that many felt were more about spotlight than mourning. But the real tragedy is that Michael, the man behind the music, was never truly free. He spent his life trying to escape a past that was always lurking just behind the curtain. A past filled with fear, control, and emotional wounds so deep that even immense talent and worldwide adoration couldn't heal them. The family image crafted in the early days, the Jackson Five, the tight-knit group with matching outfits and harmonies, was just that, an image. The real story was one of pressure, pain, and a child star who was never allowed to be a child. In the end, Michael Jackson's legacy is a paradox, the man who brought joy to millions while carrying unspeakable sorrow. The family that appeared as a model of success was, behind closed doors, a house of secrets and trauma. And the boy who sang "I'll Be There" spent his life searching for someone who truly would be. His music endures, but the family history behind the icon remains one of the most disturbing and hidden truths in all of Hollywood.